team left yesterday for Peru. And that's from Ivy's church. 2 men, Chad and Steve, went down there. And you keep them in your prayer. They'll come back next Sunday. And then be praying for our men, Dre, Zach, and Dallas, as they get ready to go in a couple of weeks. It's April 12th. It's like 5 weeks away. And it's all of a sudden here. And so we're excited about their ministry that they'll be taking down there and what God is going to do through them. So please be keeping them in your prayer. And when it comes to that invite card, people are more inclined to go to church in Easter than any other time. And so take advantage of that. You might have somebody in your sphere of influence, as Justin said, that you go, boy, I don't know if they have a church. I don't know if they know God. This might be the opportunity to do that. Just give them the card. It's a soft ask, okay? Hey, I go to this church on Sunday, and would love for you to join me, maybe on Easter, maybe the week before, but love for you to come. And so those are inside of your bulletin today to do that. Now, sometimes we mail cards, but I've kind of thought about that. That's not a bad thing to do. We'll probably do that too. But that's kind of letting the United States Postal Service do our job, isn't it? Isn't it our responsibility to invite people to church? So I'm going to let the guy walking around with, blue shorts and a blue shirt do that? No, that's I'll do that. And so that's why that card is inside of your bulletin. And I encourage you to take that and use it. And if you run out, which I hope you do, you'll grab one next week. They're on the tables in the foyer that you can pick those up every week and use those as a way to invite people to church. I want to show you something this morning that ties into what we're going to talk about. And if we're ready for that, go ahead and push play, and then I'll come right back. Okay, wait a second, you guys. Okay, here we go.
No, I'm making flower barrettes, see? I call them penny blossoms. I made one for myself, and then all the girls at work wanted one. Then I showed some to this lady who runs a shop in Old Town. She sells cards and homemade jewelry. She said she wanted to sell them. I said, okay. And in 1 week, I made $156.
Good for you. Sign here.
Sheldon, don't you get it? If this takes off, I won't have to be a waitress anymore.
But then who will bring me my cheeseburger on Tuesday nights?
Another waitress?
What's her name?
I don't know.
And you're going to let her handle my food?
Nancy. Her name is Nancy.
I think you're just making that up.
Sheldon, I'm sorry about your hamburger, okay? I just don't want to be a waitress for the rest of my life.
Cheeseburger. I get a cheeseburger.
Fine, cheeseburger.
Maybe I'd be better off with Nancy.
So, what do you think? I mean, this could be a business, right?
How many of these can you make a day?
About 20.
And how much profit do you make per penny blossom?
I don't know, like 50 cents, I'm not sure.
No, of course you're not. All right. $10 a day times 5 days a week times 52 weeks a year is $2,600.
That's all?
Before taxes.
I don't have to pay taxes on this stuff.
I believe the Internal Revenue Service would strongly disagree. But if you took advantage of modern marketing techniques and you optimized your manufacturing process, you might be able to make this a viable business.
And you know about that stuff?
Penny. I'm a physicist. I have a working knowledge of the entire universe and everything it contains.
Who's Radiohead?
I have a working knowledge of the important things in the universe. Good luck.
Sheldon, hold on. Could you maybe show me how to make more money with this?
Of course I could.
Maybe I'll watch Big Bang Theory. Well, if you were just introduced to the Big Bang Theory, I guess. Sheldon is a know-it-all. He thinks he knows everything. My favorite line in that whole thing is there, Penny. I'm a physicist. I have a working knowledge of the entire universe and all that it contains. Now, how many of you have bumped into that person who thinks they have a working knowledge of the entire universe? And okay, under 18 counts. Anybody in your house who's under 18 think they got that covered? Yeah. Sometimes we wish we did have a working knowledge of the entire universe. Sheldon is under the illusion that somehow he knows how everything works. Not just in his world, but the entire universe. And of course, Penny pushes back and he says, the important things in the universe. I push back even further and say, I would love to have a working knowledge of just my little universe, of what's going on within my little world. Wouldn't you? Because how many times you have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow? There's this thing that happened last week, this thing that happened yesterday, this thing that could happen tomorrow, and this thing that could happen next month. And you don't know how all of that is going to work in your little universe. And there's a lot of medicines that are for sale even today you can buy that helps you relax when you don't know how all the strands in your world are going to fit together, because it creates an enormous amount of anxiety. If we understood how the whole universe worked, then our little lives, cake. But we don't even really know how our lives work together and how God is going to work inside of them to bring about good things. Sheldon is full of himself. Sheldon is full of everything that nothing can do. He can't have a working knowledge of the universe, let alone our individual lives. For the last several weeks, we've been talking about a man named Joseph and his integrity and how he managed to put God first in everything. Even when trials emerged, even when he was high and then he was low, when he was the top of Potiphar's house and at the bottom of the prison, he kept God in the center of all things. I'm sure he had moments of frustration when he wrestled inside of his cell in prison. I'm sure he had moments of great anxiety, wondering if the cupbearer was ever going to remember him. But he managed to keep a soft heart towards God, believing that God was going to bring all things together for good. Sometimes we have a working knowledge of some things. God has a working knowledge of all things. We make decisions based on some things. God makes decisions based on all things. And when he brings them all together, I call it convergence. It's the word that keeps coming to my mind. Is that when from many things comes one. From a whole bunch of different things that go out there, you don't know how it fits, and then God manages to bring them all to one, as only God could. Only God can do something that great, that massive, and bring them back into one thing where you sit back and go, oh, that's how that happened. That's why that happened. In our story with Joseph, we'll see how convergence takes place. We'll see how his sale to Egyptian slaveholders worked. We'll see how his brothers worked together. We'll see how his father comes back into the story. And we'll see how God even uses weather cycles, diets, trade routes, everything. God converges them all into one. And it's not just about Joseph. It's about a whole bunch of things. And we actually get to see it take place inside of this story. So if you have your Bibles, turn back to the book of Genesis. And starting in chapter 42, just to rewind a little bit. Joseph has come out of prison. He is now the minister of grain. I don't know what else to call him. He's the one who's responsible for all of the food in all of Egypt. Everywhere and everybody is going to come to him for food. He stores grain for 7 years. 7 years has flown by already by the time you get to chapter 42. 7 years of famine are on the way, but we've had 7 years of complete harvest, plentiful. In fact, by the time you get to chapter 42, verse 1, it's already been 2 years into the famine. So we're 9 years into Joseph coming out of prison. He has stored up so much grain, they've stopped counting. Reminds me of our checking account. Just kidding. But he's so much grain that he doesn't even count. Think about what he has had to do, his administrative skills. He's not only had to figure out how to store the grain, he's had to figure out how to keep the grain from rotting. How to keep varmints out of the grain. How to keep thieves away from the grain. He's had to put together a whole way of charging for the grain. And then he's had to worry about national security to keep his grain safe because people are going to come in and try to steal it. He has done an enormous amount of work to keep this grain ready for the famine, which is to come. If you're keeping count, Joseph is about 39 years old. He was sold, if you use a rough number, of maybe 17. That's how the last time we hear of his age. 17. Now it's 22 years later. He's 39. That's a long time to wait, isn't it? He's been waiting for quite a while. He's gotten himself established. He has a wife. He has 2 children inside of Egypt. He's got a wonderful house. But there's this thing out there that's looming, and that's his dreams. He had 2 dreams about what God was going to do with his brothers, and they were all part of the dream. So it's just not 2 dreams that are lingering. It's his brothers and his family that are going to come back into his life. He just doesn't know when. He doesn't know how. But it starts to unfold unbeknownst to him in chapter 42. We don't have time this morning to read through the whole passage, so I just kind of want to focus on a few things in the passage to kind of highlight what I'm driving at this morning. Joseph has now got people coming in from all over the world to buy grain from him. Jacob is starving in the land of Canaan. And so he says to his boys who are all standing around, just getting hungry. They're all kind of standing around with their mouths gaping open. Now what do we do? So you can just imagine this elderly man walks up to his sons and say, hey, knuckleheads, go buy grain inside of Egypt. Go. Well, I hadn't thought about that, Dad. Okay. So they wander off. They go off to buy grain. That's how I envision that happening. Dad kicks them to work. Like my dad used to kick us off the couch on Saturday morning to go clean the garage. That's how he kicks them off the couch. Go buy grain in Egypt. And so they wander off to go buy grain in Egypt. Now you can imagine there's a collision. Here it comes, okay? Joseph doesn't know that his brothers are on the way. They don't know they're going to go see their brother. We get the luxury of knowing the story. And so here they come. The worlds are colliding, and they're going to go. They show up. Now Joseph was the ruler in verse 6 over all the land, and he had all the food and under his control. He sees his brothers. He recognizes them, but they didn't recognize him. But notice verse 8. Joseph recognized his brothers, although they did not. In verse 9, Joseph remembered God's promises. Joseph remembered what God said to him. You want to keep a soft heart going through the waiting room of life? Remember God's promises that he has made to you. Remember the things that God has promised you. It will not forget them. If you forget them, your heart will grow hard. God has made promises. He keeps his promises. A professor of mine had a daughter who recently got married while I was in school, and he came to class one day, and he said, I talked to my daughter last night on the phone. Teachers tell on their kids all the time. And so I was talking to my daughter, and she called, and she was upset. Oh, the anxiety inside of her voice. She said that, Daddy, we've paid all of the bills. We've gone grocery shopping. We've done, everything has just been met, and we only have $20 left. $20, that's all we have left to live on. Dr. Hannah says, sweetheart, you need to fall upon your knees and worship God. He has given you $20 you didn't need. And I'm sitting in my chair going, but I need more than 20. God's promises to meet our needs. Remember those. I heard that story 15 years ago. And I can hear Dr. Hannah telling the story. And I remember God's promises. He doesn't promise to meet my wants. He promises to meet my needs. And when you're going through the waiting room, you're wondering, when. Remember his promises that he's made to you. He'll meet your needs. Reevaluate your needs. We call that the needer versus the wanter meter in your life. Make sure you get the right one. God meets your needs. Remember his promises. But notice another line that pops in verse 11, and I love this. Imagine you're Joseph. You're inside of your splendor as an Egyptian, okay? You have all that you could ever want. 9 years of complete stability. You've been a smashing success. And here come a couple brothers that you remember very, very well. You remember your dreams. You remember what God has spoken to you. And here come your brothers. You remember their lie, their hardened hearts towards you. That's all you can think about in them. They lied and sold you into slavery. And look what they say in verse 11 as he accuses them of being spies in verse 9. The brothers said, go back to 10, No, my Lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We're not spies. We're all the sons of one man. We are honest men. Now, if you're Joseph, would that not make you go, you're what? We're honest men. Now let that linger because that is going to drive the narrative. Joseph is going to test their honesty. How honest are you? We're honest men. Put him in jail for 3 days. That's how this story goes. Put him in jail for 3 days. Now I can't help but think that had to be a little bit of vengeance, would you say? There might have been a little bit of joy in that. I know that I would have found a little bit of joy in that. Hey, honest guys, prison you go. All 10 of you go into prison. Not for one night, 3 days. 3 days they sit. I wonder if they sat near the same cell that Joseph was in for many years. 3 days they go in there, and Joseph is now going to make a deal with them. He walks down, and he overhears them talking. Look over in verse 21 of chapter 42. As they're in jail, he hears them saying to one another, Then they said to one another, Truly we are guilty concerning our brother. because we saw the distress of his soul when he pleaded with us. Yet we would not listen. Therefore, this distress has come upon us. Reuben answers, did I not tell you? Did I not tell you? That's a biblical way of saying, I told you so, I told you so, I told you so. Okay? Did I not tell you? Did I not tell you? And you would not listen. Now comes the reckoning for his blood. The drama. Joseph hears this outside the cell. Maybe he's just down the hallway. They don't think anybody can understand their language. Joseph does. They're speaking as if no one's listening. Joseph is not only listening, he understands. And he puts together a plan to test the question. We are honest men. And so they ask, first you get Reuben. He's the oldest. The next brother that pops on the screen is Simeon. Simeon is then charged with staying in jail. Joseph comes and says, all right, here's the deal. If you are honest men, do you have a father? You have a other brother? Yes, okay. Simeon stays here in jail with me. You go get your younger brother and bring him back. Okay? Sounds like a good deal. You don't argue with the second in command of the superpower, okay? And so they have to acquiesce to this. And if you can just imagine Simeon saying, we're honest men. Okay, that's easy for Simeon to say. Simeon has no skin in the game. Now his 9 brothers wander off to go back to Canaan, and he's inside of jail waiting for them to return. I think Joseph is messing with Simeon. Because if you're Simeon, this could take a while. The story ends with him going back. And of course, Jacob is not going to let his youngest son, Benjamin, go back. He's not going to let it happen. And so Simeon sits there in jail. I don't know for how long. But with each night, you know what Simeon's thinking? They're not honest men. They're not honest men. They're not honest men. They're not coming back. He probably, because you know what they could say when they go back? They can go back to Jacob and simply say, yeah, Simeon died. What can you do? We're all going to starve. We're not going back to Egypt. And if I'm Simeon, that's what I'm thinking they're going to say. Because they're not honest men. They're not honest men. They're not honest men. It's been 22 years. They've been lying about the same thing for 20. They're not honest men. And so there's Simeon waits. The next brother that pops up in the screen. We're honest men. That's going to be put to test. We're not quite too sure. I don't think I am. Another brother emerges in chapter 43. This is maybe why all this is happening to Joseph. Verse 3 of chapter 43. Judah speaks up. Judah. He had a whole chapter given to him a while back. I think it was chapter 39. God is working in the life of Judah. Reuben has been disqualified from being the son of promise. So is Simeon. They've both done things that have disqualified them. Judah, however, God is going to work through this lion's whelp, is what he'll be called. God is working in the life of Judah. And finally, Reuben speaks. Simeon is left in Egypt. It is now up to Judah. That's why I think Judah is the one who primarily lied to Jacob. Now Judah is going to have to say something. And now he's going to have to assume the position of leadership within this family. And so he speaks up to Jacob. And he pleads with Jacob, if we don't go back, we're all going to die. Jacob says, great, go back. But you're not taking Benjamin. Dad, if we don't take Benjamin, the man said, like the second in command of the superpower that has all of the food, if we don't take Benjamin back, nobody eats. It's pointless for us to go back. We have to take Benjamin back. And as you read that section of chapter 43, there's inside of Judah a deep sense of affection for his father. Judah has been lying for 22 years. Reuben was right. The day of reckoning has come, and it's aiming at Judah. God has orchestrated weather patterns. God has orchestrated wheat and barley. He has orchestrated harvest trends. He's orchestrated travel. He's orchestrated superpowers. He has done all of this, and he's bringing Judah closer to himself, which makes me wonder about how God puts us in a waiting room and why. Is it possible that God is putting you in a waiting room to reach somebody else for Christ? You might be in a waiting room. You might be in a waiting room thinking, why am I here? Do you think that maybe you're in that waiting room to bring somebody to Jesus? If God does this with Joseph, do you think he can still do this today? Do you? Nod with me. Give me an amen. Tell me something. Do you? I think he does. I think he puts his believers in place and has you there for a specific reason to touch somebody's life with the gospel. You're there. You're not just there waiting. You're there to be used. God is working in Judah's life, and He's causing all of this to converge into one thing, and He's going to redeem the time. Because it's just not Joseph that hangs in the balance. It's just not Judah. All of redemptive history is hanging in the balance. If the family dies, starves to death, the promise expires. There's no one to carry the promise. Everything is hinging on Judah. It's kind of one of those really scary things. It's kind of when you think about the Christmas story and Mary, the whole redemptive story hinges on a 15-year-old. Yes. Yes. On the macro level, yes. And somebody's redemptive story is in your life and it hinges on you. Say something. Maybe God has you there for that specific purpose. I believe He still does this today. He still uses our time. When we think we're waiting and wasting, we're not. God is doing something there to bring glory to Himself. So, he finally is able to return. He's finally able to go back. And he's able to go and take Benjamin with him. Benjamin hasn't been on a road trip with his 10 brothers. Think about this. Benjamin believes that his other brother, Joseph, was killed. Benjamin has no idea what's happening. None. Okay? Put that in your memory and just think about that. He is as Jacob is in regards to Joseph's death. Has no clues to what happened except what the brothers have said. So they go back. They wander their way back and they show up inside of Joseph's throne room again. If you can imagine, they prepared quite a present. Look in verse 25 of chapter 43. They prepared the present for Joseph's coming at noon. And in the previous sections, it tells us that Jacob sent wagons full of great things. Show him the best that we have. And so they bring this wonderful gift. And in verse 25, they prepare it as a present for Joseph when he comes in at noon. For they heard that they were going to eat a meal there. All of this is really weird if you're the brothers. Hebrews don't eat with Egyptians. And he's going to have a meal with us? Why are we eating with this guy? What's going on? Can you imagine the suspense for these 10 brothers is, all I want is grain and I want to go back home. I don't want to have a meal. I just want to get grain and go home. And so they have to wait there. And they have to wait and they wait. Joseph comes home, comes into the house. And then they asked about their, 27, then Joseph asked about their welfare. Is your father fine? In verse 27, yeah, he's great. Is he still alive? Well, yeah, he's still alive and well. They said, our servant is well, in verse 28. And as he lifted his eyes, he saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son. He said, is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me? Yes. Now just imagine, Joseph hasn't seen his full brother in 22 years. He hasn't seen a relative in just maybe a few months ago. He has seen his beloved brother for the first time. The emotions overwhelm him. He cries. He leaves, verse 30, goes back and before he comes back, he washes his face, cleans himself up, controls himself, and he sits down and he says, serve the meal. And so they eat. They have a wonderful meal. In verse 34, they even have leftovers. They take these little foam boxes home. He takes portions of food and they go and they feasted and they drank freely. And if you just imagine, put it within context, they've had a famine for 9 years. They're eating and drinking freely. This is a buffet, okay? The grand buffet. And they're eating all they can possibly eat. They're having a wonderful time talking. It's great. And it's time to leave. Finally, they get to leave in verse 44 and they're heading, or chapter 44, and they're heading home. And it's great. They got their bags of goods. We got Simeon with us. We got Benjamin with us. Judah's thinking, I did it. We're headed home. The day of reckoning has passed. Homeward. We got food for months, if not years. We're doing great. But Joseph has framed them. He's still wondering if they're honest men. And so he puts his silver goblet inside of Benjamin's bag. And if you just imagine this, they're heading home, they're driving off in their donkeys. I guess you drive off on your donkey. And they're driving off, and they get off maybe a distance out, and Joseph says, go get them. And so off goes his steward. He sees them, stops them, and says, one of you stole the silver goblet. Judah says, no, none of us did. They all say, no, we didn't. Okay, and he knows where the goblet is, so now he's going to mess with them. He starts with the oldest. No goblet. Second, no goblet. Judah, no goblet. Goes right down the line. The brothers are thinking, see, no goblet as they get to number 10. No goblet. Then he reaches into Benjamin's goblet. Dun, dun, dun. Benjamin is going to die. As far as they know, Benjamin's dead. Back to Egypt they go. And if you could just imagine what that must have felt like, the ride home. Benjamin, you stole a goblet. They don't know about being friends. Now they have to, what are we going to do with all of this? And they get back, and of course Judah, again, this story is just as much about Judah as about anything else. This story is about bringing him into the position of leadership that he's supposed to be in. He shows up, and in verse 14 of chapter 44, Judah goes through the whole story. From beginning to end, he mentions that Joseph was torn and killed. He just says nothing about slavery. It says nothing about being sold. There's only 11 guys in the room who know about Joseph being sold into slavery. Benjamin is not one of them. So he mentions, Judah goes through the whole story, tells them all the things that have happened, and with all of the sorrow that their dad would have if Benjamin does not come back. In fact, he says in dramatic terms, the man's life, our father's life, is wrapped up in the boy's life. If we go back without our brother, he will die. Joseph can handle it no more. Chapter 45. The Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried, "Have everyone go out from me." Can you just imagine if you're the brothers? They don't know he's Joseph. Everyone leave. So all these Egyptians go, okay. They wander off. It's just Joseph and the 11. The 12 are together again. They haven't been together like this for 22 years. They still don't know who they're talking to. Everyone is sent out of the room, and he weeps so loudly. Awkward. Because if you're one of the brothers, you're thinking, do I hug him? Do I say it's okay? What's going on? Because they don't know. Why is he crying? They don't know. They have no idea what's about to drop on them. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it. That's a loud cry. And the household of Pharaoh heard it. So people down the block hear him crying. Then Joseph said to his brothers, note the exclamation point, "I am Joseph." And he had, dun, dun, dun. Well done, Mary. Good timing, too. Dun, dun, dun. "I am Joseph." The exclamation point. Remember, he's crying loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. So it's not, "Hey, sup, I'm Joseph." No, I mean, it's, "I am Joseph, the one that you were speaking of who was torn to pieces. Hi, you are honest men." If anybody had an opportunity to draw the sword, that would be a good time, wouldn't it? "I am Joseph. Is my brother still alive?" But his brothers could not answer. They're dismayed. Wait, you're who? You're Joseph? And now think of Benjamin. Last thing he heard, brother was torn to pieces. He's sitting there going, "You're so busted when I tell Dad. Because you guys have been lying to Dad for 22 years and to me." And Joseph looks at Benjamin, and Benjamin looks at Joseph, and their eyes are the size of saucers. Can you believe this? That's my brother. We're honest men. Joseph is just as much a victim of this as Jacob is. You guys lied. The day of reckoning has come, has it not? Now, if you're one of the other brothers, not Benjamin, Joseph has all the power within him to have every single one of you put to death. And nobody will ask him a question about it. Not a soul. Pharaoh doesn't even concern himself with Joseph and what Joseph is doing. He could kill them all and be done with it, keep Benjamin, go home and get Jacob and bring them all back. Jacob probably wouldn't argue with that, okay? Bring them all back. He could do it. And if there's a time for vengeance, now is the time. Now is the time to act out in revenge. Notice what Joseph says. "I am Joseph, I'm still alive." Then Joseph says to his brothers, "Please come closer to me." Just a few moments before, they wouldn't even sit down and eat at the same table. They were in the same room, but they would not share a meal at the same table. Now he says, "Come closer to me. Get close. See my eyes, see my face, look at me." And they came closer. "I am your brother, whom you sold into slavery." Not torn to pieces, not no more, but you sold into slavery. Now, after that sentence, the brothers There's a lump in their throat, and there's fear. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me. For God sent me before you to preserve life. Think about that for a minute. It's been 22 years. Joseph's heart has not forgotten God's promises. Joseph has been wronged by his brothers, by Potiphar, by a cupbearer. He has every reason inside of his mind to be hateful, to be angry, to be vengeful, to use his authority to enact justice because he has been done wrong. But look how he perceives what has taken place. God has sent me here. God has brought me to this place. You thought you sold me here, but God sent me here. I find that to be a stunning contrast to how we see things. The motives of the brothers wasn't to preserve life, it was to end it. But God worked in spite of that motivation and preserved life. They tried to bury justice. God revealed justice and also revealed that He is a God who is long-suffering. He is a God who is patient. He is a God whose sovereignty even involves the wicked and can use injustice to bring about good. They came to find food. God was going to fill their souls through reconciliation. They came to find, or they intended evil, but God intends good. Which brings in a whole discussion of evil in our world today. Because we see it on our TV sets, we see it sometimes in our own lives. We see what drugs can do to our loved ones. We can see what alcohol can do to those even around us and our neighbors, and as people are killed as evil has its way. But God in some way, somehow, works evil and brings it to good. He doesn't create evil. God doesn't invent evil. He doesn't have to. There's plenty of it. But our sovereign God works even with the evil, even with wicked, and He brings it in a way to where He will bring about good. The brothers don't die. The end of the story is the brothers lived. Look what he says in verse 6. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are still 5 years left. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth and to keep you alive. Notice the self-sacrifice in this. God sent me here to save you. This is not even about Joseph. Joseph sees a bigger thing going on than himself, which is critical when living in the waiting room. There's more at stake than you. God is doing something bigger than you, and you fit into it, but God is at work. For me, I'd love to see these guys punished. Wouldn't you? God says, no. I am working to bring about their reconciliation with themselves, with their family, and with their brother. And even on a greater scale, I'm bringing about redemption for all of mankind through this injustice. Because it was. But God in His sovereignty and His greatness brings about everything for good. The perpetrators of such wickedness were given the opportunity to see God's providence. God wishes that none should perish, but all should come to a working knowledge of who He is. When I was young, I had the opportunity to go to Disneyland a lot. We lived in Orange County, Anaheim, not far from Disneyland. And so I was able to go, and there's my favorite place was Cinderella's Palace. It's true. Cinderella's Palace. You are going, did he say yes? Because in Cinderella's Palace was the coolest little thing. There was, just when you walk through the main gate, just to the left, if I remember it right, just to the left, there was a guy in there with really, really dark goggles, and he had glass, and he had a torch, looked like that. It was awesome. As a little boy walking in to see something like that, cool. He is blowing glass. He takes these instruments of just sticks of glass, which at one time was sand. How that works, I don't quite figure out. And he melts them. He puts them inside of that torch. And with his goggles, through all the heat and all of the stuff going on around him, he focuses in on that glass. Now, I'm standing outside. I've always been a smart aleck, so I want to do this. And see if I can distract him. And I can't because he's working on the glass. He's working away at these glass. And it's awesome to watch because as a little boy, there's fire involved. And if I could put fire on Wednesday nights, somehow in our Awana program, our numbers would triple, okay? Because fire in little boys is fantastic. And so he's working with glass. People are walking around. They're indifferent to what he's doing. And I'm just mesmerized as he's working on glass. What is he making? What is he making? He takes these very unattractive rods of glass, which you don't put those anywhere, and he burns them, he melts them, he's weaving them, and you can't see what he's doing because of the heat. All he can see because he's got goggles on, and he's working and he's working and he's working, and then in time he pulls out this piece and he pulls out this piece. You kind of start gathering a little bit of what he's doing, but then ultimately when he's done, you have this figurine that sits on a shelf that looks like that. And behind you in that store, all these little figurines that went through the fire and came out looking like that, something you would put on your shelf at home. It's a dolphin. I played for the Dolphins when I was a little boy, so dolphins were important to me. I remember the dolphins that he would make out of all of that. And all of that glass, all of those strands would come together, and you would sit back and go, wow, he did that through heat, through silica, glass, molding it together with all of the distractions, all of these things taking place around him. He makes something like that. Brothers and sisters, how more glorious are you when God puts you on his mantle and says, that's what I was making out of you. I don't know what it will be. I really don't. And quite honestly, neither do you. But God is making something. He takes all of these little parts and he weaves them together to make something glorious. Not glorious in the sense of, wow, that is such a wonderful piece of art. You can look at it, but the question you're going to ask is, who made that? And if the dolphin could speak, he would say, not me, not me. God made that. And when we get to heaven, you know what it's going to be like? You'll get there by grace through faith in Christ and Christ alone, and you'll say, God did that. You'll look back on your life and you'll see how all the convergence happened, and you'll see, oh wow, look at that, look at that. Look what God, glory to God. Because of how the many things that he can weave together, even the wicked, he weaves to make something beautiful. And I don't know how it's possible. Think about the glass blower in there. The glass sticks don't argue with him, do they? They don't have an opinion. I don't want to go in the fire. Oh, they don't do anything like that. They're just there. The artist who paints on a canvas, the canvas doesn't argue. Don't put that on me. I don't like that color. Do a different color. He doesn't argue. The sculptor who's working with stone, the stone doesn't argue. It is an inanimate object. It cannot move. And yet we stand back and look at those things and go, wow, what a beautiful artist. He did a wonderful thing. Now imagine this. God is working with the canvas and with stone and with glass that moves. You move. You can stand there and go, no. You can say, I'm not going to be involved. I'm going to walk away. And yet God still, in his sovereignty and his providence, weaves it to make something beautiful. And we can move. I find that to be reason to give him praise, don't you? Because I can look back in my life and go, yeah, I wiggled. I move. And yet God used even that to bring about glory for himself. And I read this story. God sent him. The brothers want to say, we sold you. No, Joseph says, God sent me here. That's a result of a man who remembers God's promises. And you might be even in the middle of that moment where you're waiting for God to work. Convergence is from many, come one. How do you experience that? Remember his promises. Remember. Constantly remember. Remember him in the things that he has done for you. Remember him. Don't forget what he has done. In the past, look back. Remember. Keep on loving him in all things. Remember his promises and commit yourself to love him. The next thing is to keep looking for him. Look for him in the small things. Look for him in all of the little things. Look for his hand and how things come together. It could be the smallest little thing. Have you had a healthy year? You weren't sick this year as you were last year? Are your shoes wearing out? Little things. How often has the car broken down? Little things that are not there. Did you bump into a store credit you didn't realize you had? I needed that. But somehow you Didn't know it was there, but God. Little things that God does for you. You still employed? Praise the Lord. Find reason. Look for His hand and how God is working. We talked about this in the week past. Look at how you're learning things in the waiting room. Look for His hand. Remember Him. Look for Him. And then finally, extend grace. It's hard to get my mind around that Joseph didn't draw a sword. He extends grace to men who were not honest men. They lied. He extends grace to them. Can you do that? Someone does you wrong, an injustice as we've talked about. Can you extend grace? That maybe God is working in their lives to bring them into a right relationship with Him or fellowship or something. Can you extend grace? That's very, very difficult. That's almost supernatural. You're almost going to need the Holy Spirit to do that. Very difficult. But it's a byproduct of a man who remembers God, who has seen God in all the little things, and is able to extend grace to those who show up and had done, because in the past have done terrible things to him. Extend grace. Don't be afraid to extend grace. What you intended for evil, God has worked for good. He did it in Joseph's life. I believe He can do it in your life. I believe that when you allow Him to do that, you will find more grace and more love than you can ever thought of or imagine. Believe it or not, we don't have to have a working knowledge of the universe. Whew, take the pressure off. You don't. You have a God who put all of that together. He has a working knowledge of the universe. And what sometimes makes my mind go is that not only does He have a working knowledge of the universe, we discover something new. God says, oh yeah, I put that there like a long time ago. Glad you found it. Wonderful. He has a working knowledge of me and you all at the same time. And He's weaving it all together for something glorious. What kind of canvas will you be? No, I don't want to do that. No, I'm not good. Don't be the kind of canvas that argues with the Creator. Let Him work. Remember, look for His hand and extend grace. We have the opportunity to follow the one who has a working knowledge of the universe. Love Him. Remember Him, look for Him, and extend grace to those who hurt you, and see what God does in your life as a result. Ephesians 5:1 says, therefore, my brothers, imitate God. Whew. That means extend grace